Thanks for tuning in. I'm Michael Watson, and this is the InfluenceWatch podcast. In this episode, extreme environmentalists vow to shut down transportation in the nation's capital, the UAW strikes against General Motors, and the Women's March replaces one set of controversial board members with another. A group calling itself Shut Down DC intends to block traffic on major thoroughfares in the nation's capital on Monday, September 23rd. The radical environmentalists demand the passage of the Green New Deal, policy a prominent critic called a, quote, radical top-down socialist makeover of the entire U.S. economy, and which one of its major supporters admitted was, quote, a how-do-you-change-the-entire economy thing, an end to all conventional energy projects, and a national emergency declaration against climate change. Oh, and the demonstrators vow to repeat the actions as early as 2 weeks later. The demonstrators are taking tactics, and in some cases branding, from the UK radical environmentalist group Extinction Rebellion, which engaged in similar disruptions in London earlier this year. According to his LinkedIn page, Patrick Yunn, a shutdown DC organizer who spoke to the Washingtonian on behalf of the group, is a senior research analyst for the International Brotherhood of Teamsters Labor Union. He was previously a campaigner for the environmentalist group Rising Tide International. The demonstration's website and Action Network funding campaign are sponsored by All Out DC, a group of radical demonstrators associated with the extremist Antifa movement. For more on Extinction Rebellion and the activist tactics Shut Down DC is borrowing, I commend you to my colleague Ken Braun's piece at capitalresearch.org, Unabombers Without Bombs. Extinction Rebellion has ties to prominent left-wing financiers, with a daughter of Bobby Kennedy and a granddaughter of oil magnate J. Paul Getty leading efforts to raise $600,000 to pay Extinction Rebellion demonstrators' legal costs. This week, the United Auto Workers Labor Union ordered 46,000 union members to walk off the job at General Motors, as the union's pattern bargaining with the three Detroit automakers, GM, Ford, and Fiat Chrysler, begins. Pattern bargaining is a labor union tactic for unions that represent multiple employers in a single industry. They employ the tactic to increase their power. The union negotiates contracts that expire effectively simultaneously and targets a single employer to secure the next contract, which serves as a pattern for the other industry contracts. The UAW has chosen General Motors to set the pattern for its Detroit 3 contracts, which all expire this year. The strike comes amid a wide-ranging federal investigation of the United Auto Workers senior leadership. Federal prosecutors charged UAW Region 5 Director Vance Pearson with embezzlement of union funds and mail and wire fraud for allegedly using the union's conference account for personal luxuries, such as private dining and golf outings. The Detroit News reported that two of the unnamed UAW officials identified in charging documents were former UAW National President Dennis Williams and current UAW National President Gary Jones. Neither man has been charged, though federal agents raided both Jones's and Williams's homes. Other officials within the union are beginning to question Jones's leadership, according to the Detroit News. Jones reportedly survived a motion before the UAW Executive Board seeking his ouster. And as Democratic National Committee Chair and Obama Administration Secretary of Labor Tom Perez is showing public support for the UAW strikers, House Republicans are demanding a hearing to investigate what they called the UAW leadership's, quote, widespread brazen lawbreaking exposed by the federal corruption probe. Meanwhile, on the ground, the strike continues, as of recording time Thursday, September 19th. The company has made an offer to increase domestic investment in the number of unionized jobs, but observers speculate the UAW might be striking just to show its membership that it is, quote, on their side, despite the corruption probe. And in our final item, there is good news and bad news about the Women's March and its leadership. The good news? Radical activists Tamika Mallory and Linda Sarsour, who faced criticism for their associations with extremist, anti-Semitic Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan, are out. So is fellow board member Bob Bland. The bad news? The new board isn't any less extremist than the old board. The first tell that, contrary to some initial insinuation from the Washington Post, that Mallory, Sarsour, and Bland were not removed because of accusations of anti-Semitism against them was that Carmen Perez, herself criticized for associating with Farrakhan, remains on the board. Sources across the political spectrum found anti-Semitic and extreme anti-Israel statements by one of the new board members, Sarah Billou, the executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations San Francisco area chapter. Billou, a self-described proud anti-Zionist, compared Israeli soldiers to the terrorist group ISIS and called Zionism, quote, a very real threat to our national security. Billou's long history of anti-Jewish statements drew a rebuke from the left-of-center Anti-Defamation League. Billou was later voted off the Women's March board. Unfortunately, Billou was not alone. Samia Assed, a left-wing organizer, and Charlene Carruthers, founding national director of Black Youth Project 100, were also appointed to the board, and both have made extreme anti-Israel statements. Before the 2019 edition of the Women's March, a number of left-wing and liberal organizations appeared to distance themselves from the organization, after Jewish publication The Tablet revealed the extent of the march's anti-Semitic ties and associations with Farrakhan. If passed as prologue, the 2020 edition may see much the same effect. That's our show for this week. If you're listening to this on YouTube, we encourage you to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher, and if you have subscribed, thank you, and please leave us a 5-star rating. We'll see you next week.